Welcome to Tales from the Telly, a journey into the history of entertainment and an exploration into the human condition. My name is Susan, and today's tale starts with the history of comedy. We'll go back 2,000 years ago to Aristotle, and we'll travel along that ever-changing road until we get to the 50s and 60s era of television. What changed over that time? How did it evolve? Hopefully, by the end of this episode, you'll be able to bore your friends with a fresh new look on the miracle that is comedy. To begin, let's define some terms. Slapstick comedy, a popular genre for centuries, is described as a physical comedy with a silly tone. It is lighthearted and fun, typically using the percussive instrument, the slapstick, to make wacky sounds without seriously injuring cast members.
For the next blade, the Raja will come within 1/8 of an inch of the victim's brain. Now, not that anything has ever happened before, but we'd like the young man at the board to take his bow now in case. Good. Now, else?
Fellas, you didn't rehearse it that way. You gotta be careful. If you're not careful, somebody's gonna get hurt around here.
Vaudeville, on the other hand, is a genre of comedy described as the lack of moral intention or higher meaning. Vaudeville typically uses pantomime, light poetry, and other musical arts to get laughs from the audience. It is important to note that vaudeville routines can use slapstick comedy, two terms that are nowhere contradictory. Another term that will be important is the theory of comedy. This is a philosophical term used to describe the study of comedy. Now that we have some terms to play with, let's go along the timeline and see what we can uncover. Our first stop is Aristotle's Rhetoric from 4th century BC. In it, he explores an incredibly popular idea of comedy. Now named the incongruity theory of comedy, it describes a subversion of expectations by an orator to create the miracle of comedy. This theory states that comedy, in its most pure essence, relies upon the subversion of expectations. The comedian sets expectations as the premises of the joke, explores the situation in which he described, but then in the end relies upon some subversion of those expectations to make it funny. And this, in turn, describes a disjuncture the audience has about the subject. The comedian knows this and tries to force the audience to reflect in a corrective nature. Comedy, in this theory, acts as a corrective force employed by entertainers. The comedian tries to display disjuncture from the audience's perception of a subject and the reality of that same subject. This theory, while not perfect, is the dominant theory in both philosophy and psychology, especially after being reaffirmed by famous philosophers like Kant and Kierkegaard. Mime and pantomime clowns being a popular theater style. This style had more dramatic practices, even executing prisoners in place of actors on several recorded occasions. Now that we have the theory, let's skip ahead to the 1500s, the first recorded instance of slapstick, the instrument itself, in comedy. In the Italian Commedia dell'arte, one of its main characters, the Harlequin, uses a slapstick on the posteriors of his victims. The Harlequin, as a figure, has massive implications as to the purpose of slapstick itself, which we'll go over later. This is not the only case of slapstick in the 1500s. Shakespeare's plays often had slapstick comedy all throughout them. Chase scenes and beating scenes in many of his plays were a core attraction to the audience. Centuries later, slapstick in the West became more popular as American music hall entertainment grew as well. Vaudeville and slapstick became popular together, flourishing in post-Civil War America. But before we go further along the timeline, let's go over the origins of the term vaudeville. Specifically, vaudeville was born out of a need to entertain people without being a legitimate drama. The Comédie Française, the world's longest established national theater, had a monopoly on drama at the time. The term used in the 1400s was vaudeville, describing a satirical songs used to circumvent highbrow drama. Vaudeville, being born from necessity, carries an essence of cunning and ingenuity. Tony Pastor, the first performer of what would be called vaudeville, ascended it from its original obscene beginnings in America. Pastor ascended vaudeville from being a simple entertainment to something more, making it respectable. Before he did this, vaudeville was really only practiced in the outskirts of America, traveling around the frontier and scattered settlements. Tony Pastor, having changed vaudeville, established the first vaudeville theater in New York City in 1881. This new theater was dedicated to clean variety shows. At the same time, Fred Carnot's army was honing the pantomime skills of British comedians. This gave birth to what would be Charlie Chaplin and other famous silent comedians. Vaudeville quickly caught on, spreading through American media until reaching its peak in the late 19th century. Vaudeville, unfortunately, began to fall out of favor. As the increasing popularity of talkies and economic impacts of World War II and the Depression, it fell out of favor rather quickly. Although its demise was quick and rapid, the powerful elements of vaudeville would still remain. Slapstick had a similar course. Fortunately for slapstick, it maintained more fame during the popularization of films during the early 20th century. Charlie Chaplin, Harold Lloyd, Buster Keaton are some of the many names that popularized slapstick in American media. In truth, we owe a lot of these entertainers for the comedy that exists today. Slapstick still exists as a core attraction for many modern films and TV shows. From The Three Stooges to Jackass, slapstick itself would not simply die, but inspire comedy for generations. The best slapstick artists can turn the typically low comedy of slapstick into high art. Now that we have a general history of visual comedy, let's return to that pesky Harlequin. The Harlequin, as I'm sure many of you know, carries an intense history and meaning behind it. The intention of the Harlequin to criticize the king can be used to understand the value and power of slapstick. The Harlequin itself existed in medieval times as a way for the woes of the common man to be channeled into a vessel. The Harlequin itself existed in medieval times as a way for the woes of the common man to be channeled into a vessel. The Joker, or Harlequin, was the only figure in medieval social structures that could mock or insult the king without the penance of death. This concept directly correlates to the incongruous theory which we described earlier. The Harlequin is the method in which the facades of society are revealed to the king, subverting expectations. The comedy of the Harlequin served as a tool for the common man to posit their frustrations towards their leader without putting their own heads on the line. In this sense, the Harlequin acted as a conduit for the audience, just as the jester acts as a conduit for the writer. In the modern sense, however, the comedian or joker uses comedy as a way to force the audience to look at itself. Comedies of today have flipped the ruler from the king to the viewer, and the author is the common folk who has the withholdings about the king, or, in this context, the audience itself. The idea of the Harlequin is not limited to the genre of comedy either. It has been used in several different genres, including science fiction. Specifically, the Harlequin serves the same purpose in the science fiction story, "Repent, Harlequin," said the TikTok man. To bring things full circle, we must keep this perspective in mind when thinking about slapstick comedy. Although often silent and wacky, this comedy can have roots in real meaning. The authors that write these jokes are trying to use humor to illustrate issues they have about society. While this humor can be lower, it still carries the same essence with it. This is displayed spectacularly in the show Gilligan's Island. On its surface, it's simply a wacky TV show with wacky characters and wacky situations. If you look deeper, however, there is a question being asked by the show's creator, Sherwood Schwartz. Schwartz has real ideas about society that must be expressed in a way that society will not rebuke Schwartz from society itself. He accomplishes this by putting the Harlequin of his series through situations that display his idea of society. Theoretically, if he does his job right, the audience will come away with an idea on how he should act in situations that reflect the television show. The Harlequin, again, acts as the root for this. However, in Gilligan's Island, this idea of closeness and corrective methods of comedy are taken literally, as the show's characters are trying to amend an issue while being stuck in close proximity to each other. In our next episode, we will explore the trials and tribulations of Schwartz as he created Gilligan's Island. He had to convince executives, find the right cast members, and deal with extraordinary events to bring his baby to life. Please join us over the next few episodes as we dive headfirst into this legendary series. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like, subscribe, the bell icon to get updates, and check out the affiliate links down below.